Hello everyone, and welcome to the sky this month for September 2024. My name's Paul Martinaitis, and this show is brought to you by the Astronomical Society of South Australia. So we're at the beginning of spring, of course, in September, a wonderful time of year to be observing, one of my favourites. Nights are getting a bit warmer, and some great objects are now starting to come into view, particularly if you're interested in galaxies. So in the eastern sky, constellations such as Sculptor and Grus and Fornax, and in the northern sky, constellations such as Pegasus will start to be better placed for observation as spring progresses. And it's also a great time to be viewing the planets. All of the outer planets are now currently visible in one night, and in particular this month, Saturn and Neptune are both coming to opposition. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But to start with, let's take a look at the night sky for September. So we'll begin our tour of the sky looking west, and we're looking at the sky as it'll appear on the 23rd of September. So that'll be the beginning of the next dark sky period, end of September and going into early October, and the time's around 9 p.m. in the evening. So the great thing about viewing this particular time of year is, even though we're getting some great new objects coming up in the east and the north, we've still got access to these wonderful winter constellations, such as Sagittarius and Scorpius. And in particular, in Sagittarius, still a great opportunity to view all of the wonderful bright nebula in this region, such as the Lagoon, Trifid, Swan Nebula, and also the Eagle Nebula in Serpens. And if you're a little bit unfamiliar with those nebula, I talked about them in some more detail in the August show. So if you missed that, you might want to just go back and take a look at the the constellation of the month part of that video, where I went through these four main nebula in Sagittarius. A bit lower down, we can also see Ophiuchus, a very large constellation. It's got a huge number of objects, in particular globular clusters, which you can see there by all of these yellow circles. And Ophiuchus is going to be the constellation of the month for September. So we'll talk about just a few of the many wonderful objects in that constellation a little bit later on. So looking in the northern part of the sky now, so starting lower down, Lyra's still visible, although it's getting quite low. So now might be a good chance to have your last look at the Ring Nebula if you haven't already. And as we've discussed before, the great thing about the Ring Nebula is it's so easy to find. All you need to do is to find that parallelogram of stars above Vega, and the Ring Nebula is pretty much a third to a half of a way along the top of that parallelogram. So lovely, easy object to find. A little bit higher up in Vulpecula, you have M27, also known as the Dumbbell Nebula, another one of these really distinctive planetary nebula. It's quite huge, actually. I'm not quite sure off the top of my head of its diameter, but it's a lot larger than most planetary nebula, and it has this very distinct hourglass shape in the eyepiece. So it'll look fairly circular, and then you'll see these two dark voids coming in on each side. So that's where it gets that dumbbell name from. Looking further along to the right, we can also see Pegasus is starting to rise as well. That's got a lot of very nice galaxies in Pegasus, and that'll be the constellation of the month in a future show, where I'll go through some of the finest galaxies in Pegasus. To the left, we have Cygnus, the Swan, also getting pretty low, but probably a good opportunity to have a last look at the Veil Nebula if you haven't for a while, the supernova remnant, and you can find that quite easily just by following the right-hand arm of the Swan from the center up to Epsilon, and then you'll find the Veil Nebula just a little bit above it. And looking a little bit higher up in the sky, we have Capricorn. Not many objects in Capricorn, but probably the most interesting one of the few objects that are in Capricorn would be the Saturn Nebula, or NGC 7009. And finally, in Aquarius up here, we have another one of my favourite objects, which is NGC 7293, also known as the Helix Nebula. So that's really nice and high and well placed at the moment. And to my knowledge, that's probably the closest planetary nebula to us, or certainly one of the closest. So it's actually really huge, much bigger apparent diameter in the eyepiece than, say, the Ring Nebula. And you would have all seen photographs of it that kind of look like this, the so-called Eye of God photographs. Great object for the eyepiece as well. Main thing to remember, because it has such a large angular diameter, you need to use get a nice wide field. I would recommend starting with a wide field of, say, a degree or so, just to make sure you get enough contrast with the background. And also, because it is so large, its surface brightness is low. So it's kind of opposite to most planetary nebula. So with the Helix, because it has a low surface brightness, definitely need an O3 filter to observe it properly, and you need very dark skies as well. But given those two conditions, you'll be rewarded with a lovely puffy smoky donut. And on a good night with enough aperture, you can actually start to see some of the detail in that smoke. And you will also see the pinched shape that you can see here in this photograph. So a wonderful, wonderful object. So if you're like me and you love your galaxies, and perhaps you've been missing them during winter, the eastern part of the sky will make you happy, because we can start to see some of the constellations that have these wonderful spring galaxies in them starting to move into position. So looking lower down near the horizon, we can see Cetus there. We can start to see a good part of Eridanus. Looking a little bit higher up, we can see Fornax, and of course Sculptor. So Sculptor already is getting fairly high, and that'll continue as spring progresses. So you can start to get a look at galaxies such as NGC 55, 300, and of course many people's favourites, NGC 253, the so-called Sculptor galaxy, which you see so often in photographs, and also looks wonderful through an eyepiece in really any sort of telescope, provided you look at it through a dark sky. And looking a little bit higher up still, we of course have Grus. That's now very near the zenith. A lot of very nice galaxies in Grus, including of course the Grus Quartet, which is sort of around here, around the back of Grus. So we'll now take a look at the lunar calendar for September. So now that we're in spring, of course, the days are starting to get longer again. So on the 1st of September, darkness began at 1926 and went through to 4:53 in the morning. By the end of September, darkness will begin at around 1951 and go through until 4:14 in the morning. So the dark sky period for September will begin on the 23rd. So that's when the moon won't interfere with our observations, and that'll go through to around the 5th of October or so. And the moon phases are, new moon was on the 3rd, first quarter will be on the 11th, full moon will be on the 18th, and the last quarter will be on the 25th. So taking a look at the solar system now, if we look at the inner planets, we can see that Mercury really sticks pretty close to the sun throughout September, so not really a great time at all to be observing Mercury. Venus, on the other hand, is a good distance away and is a very prominent evening object, and I'm sure you would have all seen Venus in the evening sky, and it will remain so throughout September. So a good time to be viewing Venus. Looking now to the outer planets. So firstly, in the evening hours after midnight, or the early morning hours, I suppose, you can take a look at Mars, Jupiter, and Uranus, and they will all appear in roughly a straight line in the night sky. Jupiter, even though we're quite a few months away from its opposition in December, is still quite large, and certainly large enough to get some great detail through your telescope, as well as, of course, observing its moons. Mars comes into opposition on January 2025, so still too far away from Mars to get any real effective observation, but it still makes a good telescopic object. Finally, swinging around to the remaining two planets, Saturn and Neptune. Saturn comes into opposition on the 8th of September, so we can see that Saturn, the Earth and the Sun will all be in a straight line at that point. And then a little bit later on in the month, on the 21st, Neptune is coming into opposition. So a great month to be observing in detail both Saturn and also Neptune, which we'll talk about shortly. So as we've seen, Venus will be an evening object throughout September and indeed for the rest of the year. But on the 5th of September, the moon will also join the view, coming to within about a degree of the planet. So that should make a lovely pairing with Venus on the right there and a lovely slender waxing crescent moon within the same binocular field of view. So if you have your binoculars handy or even a telescope, might be worth taking a look and getting them both in the same field of view. Looking now towards the early morning sky, so this shows you the view as it'll appear at around 5 a.m. in the morning before sunrise, and we can see three of the outer planets here. So two of them are naked eye. So firstly, on towards the right, you can see Mars, which will spend September in Gemini. Further up in the middle will be Jupiter, and then finally over to the left will be Uranus. So Mars and Jupiter, of course, are naked eye objects. You can't miss them. Mars will be an intense bright reddish colour. Jupiter, very bright white. And then that will contrast quite nicely with Aldebaran, the brightest reddish star in Taurus. And of course, Jupiter, even though it's some time away from opposition, still worth taking a look at through the telescope if you happen to have it out. And Uranus over to the right there is about 4 degrees above the Pleiades, so you'll definitely need a pair of binoculars at least to spot that faint planet. So as we saw, Saturn comes to opposition on the 8th of September. So this shows you its position at around 11 p.m. on the 8th, but it won't shift around much throughout September. And also Neptune is coming to opposition as well on the 21st. So Neptune will spend the month pretty much in the middle of the circlet of Pisces on the left and the head of Cetus on the right. So we'll take a more detailed look at that shortly. So one thing to note, obviously an excellent opportunity to be looking at Saturn. This month, it's the largest it's going to be for a while and also at its brightest. And one thing, of course, is the rings are relatively at a fairly shallow angle, presently about between 4 and 5 degrees. And that will continue to close as the year goes on. And I think they actually go pretty much edge on in March next year. Although, unfortunately, we probably won't be able to see them when they're precisely edge on because Saturn will at that point be too close to the Sun. But now is a good opportunity since the rings are fairly tilted out of the way. It means you can examine the more equatorial regions of the disk and see some of the belts if the seeing is good enough and if you use sufficient magnification. And of course, while we're at it, also take a look for the Cassini division. So that's that large gap in the rings. Of course, the Cassini division, again, is not as easy to see as it has been in the past because the rings are tilted towards us at a relatively shallow angle. So we now come to Neptune, and at the moment it's not too difficult to find. So it's kind of in between the circlet of Pisces, which you can see that circlet of 6 stars on the left, and that triangle, which is the head of Cetus. So if you draw a line between Gamma Pisces and Iota Cetus, if you go about a third of the way along that line from Gamma, you'll be in about the right position to find Neptune. So you can see I've marked the position there both with a tellrad. So that largest circle represents 4 degrees, which is roughly a little bit smaller also than the view of a magnifying finder that you might have on your telescope. So that gives you a pretty good idea where to sweep up and find Neptune. And you can also see there's sort of a line of 4 or 5 relatively bright magnitude 5.5 stars above Neptune, which you should be able to easily pick out in the finder scope to let you know that you're in the right position. So other than that, another good way of locating Neptune is, of course, using, again, an app like Sky Safari to give you a real up-to-date map of where it is currently. And you can zoom in as much as needed. So the way to tell that you're actually looking at Neptune, at low magnification, it will look like a bluish sort of star. But as you increase the magnification, particularly if the seeing is good, you should be able to observe a tiny little blue disk. Looks very much like say the blue planetary does in the Southern Cross. So you'll definitely know once you're looking at Neptune, it has that beautiful blue colour. And in addition to Neptune itself, which I think is a great planet to observe, even though you can't really observe any detail on it, unfortunately, with amateur telescopes, I think it's just lovely to see that beautiful disk and just ponder that, you're looking at a planet that's really just at virtually the outer reaches of our solar system. And another nice thing to do around opposition is to look for Triton, Neptune's moon. So this shows you a simulated view through a 12-inch telescope at around 270 times. So Triton is magnitude 13.5, so it should be within the reach of an 8-inch telescope at a nice dark site. But obviously, the larger, more aperture you have, the better. And it does stick pretty close to Neptune, so you need to use high magnification. And the best times, the best times to look at it is when it has greatest elongation. In other words, when it's furthest away from the planet. And it's also, from our point of view, and it's also good to know which side of the planet to be looking at, because it often helps when we're looking at faint objects to know what position to look for in the sky. So this chart gives you an idea where to look. So I've listed the times of greatest elongation for September. So you've got the dates there along the left in that table. And then I've indicated whether it's either going to be on the southern side or the northern side. So to tell which is the southern or northern side is fairly straightforward. First thing to do is to just center Neptune in your eyepiece view. And then if you have some sort of tracking mount, switch off the tracking. Or if it's a DOB, just don't track it. And you'll see Neptune drift. So the drift direction is west. So to find out west in your eyepiece, all you need to do is allow Neptune to drift, or any object, and the direction of drift will be west. So in a Newtonian telescope or a Dobsonian telescope, north will be 90 degrees anti-clockwise and south will be 90 degrees clockwise to the drift direction. So that's indicated by the yellow arrow that you can see there. If you happen to be using a Schmidt-Cassegrain or refractor with a star diagonal, it's opposite. So the drift direction is still west, but south will be 90 degrees anti-clockwise and north will be 90 degrees clockwise, and that's indicated by the red arrow there on the left. So our constellation for the month is Ophiuchus, the healer or serpent bearer, and it's quite a very large constellation. You can see the main part of it consists of this so-called coffin asterism in the middle, and its boundary really extends from down near Hercules all the way up to curls under Scorpius, and it also touches the border of Sagittarius and Scutum as well. So there's a lot of obviously Milky Way objects within this constellation, including a huge number of globular clusters. I think I counted at least 25 accessible globular clusters in Ophiuchus. And it's also closely related to another constellation, Serpens, the Serpent, and Serpens is unique in the sense that it's actually broken up into 2 parts of the sky. So you have Serpens caput, which is the tail, and Serpens cauda on the other side of Ophiuchus, which is the head of the serpent. So there's, like I said, many globular clusters, at least 25 that you can readily see through an amateur telescope. I've only chosen 2 of them for the moment. So the first one we're going to look at is M10, which is kind of right in the middle of this coffin asterism. And to find it, it's probably easiest to star hop either from Zeta or Epsilon. And you could probably dead reckon it using a Telrad as well. So globulars are one of my favourite types of objects after galaxies, and sometimes I do hear it said that all globulars look the same, but that's not really true. I think they have a wide variety of appearances, in terms of brightness, resolution, and also shape, particularly when you look at them with high magnification. And one thing I've noticed with M10, and I noticed this very much when I last looked at it through very dark skies through my 18-inch telescope, but I've also seen it through a 12, is that it's very asymmetrical. So I find one side, which I've kind of indicated with this arrow in the photo, it's sort of got quite a straight edge, like the globular's been cut off, and it's very dim on this side. And then on the other side, opposite, you can see quite prominent arms and streams of stars coming from the globular. So it's almost as if a wind is kind of blowing the globular in that direction. So it has that real asymmetry to it, which quite a number of globulars do. But I just noticed with M10, it does have this sharp edge to it on one edge, which you can kind of see in this photograph that I took under my light polluted backyard. So very interesting globular to take a look at in any size telescope. Try a variety of magnifications from low, really crank it up as much as the seeing will allow, and see whether you too can notice that any asymmetries or any other shapes in its structure. So the next globular we're going to take a look at is M12, which is right nearby. So this is taken in infrared by a digital sky survey, so quite different to my unprofessional photo that you saw in the last slide. So M12, in contrast to M10, I find quite symmetrical. So quite symmetrical about its core, and it has almost like a starfish shape. So these streams of stars that you can see in the photo, they show up as quite prominent, sort of, I call them muscly sort of arms, and in between I tend to see voids of stars. So it's got quite a different appearance to M10. And the great thing is, because they're so close together, you can readily compare the two. So you can see M12, once you've found M10, M12 is really just about 4 degrees away. So they're quite conveniently located near each other. So our next 2 objects are planetary nebulae. So the first one I'd like to take a look at is NGC 6309, also called the Box Nebula, and that comes from the actual shape that it appears in the eyepiece. So it's a very interesting planetary nebula. A lot of them were used to being quite round or symmetrical, or perhaps even a donut shape, like we'll see in the next one, a round shape. So this one actually has a roughly rectangular shape through the eyepiece, which you can kind of see the shape here in this Hubble Space Telescope image. So that shape is readily apparent in the eyepiece. And it has kind of slightly ragged edges. And it has unlike in that photo there, through the eyepiece, I find it tends to have a slightly greenish tint when you look at it without a filter. And also you'll notice in that photo, you can actually see the central star, but visually the central star is not visible. And the reason for that is, you can see here CS, the central star, is magnitude 16.5, which under a dark sky, high magnification through, say, a 16-inch telescope or above, you could see it, but because you're looking at it against the bright background of the planetary nebula, you would have no hope of seeing that central star. So I'll just show you where that is. So here we are where we left off at M12. So the Box Nebula is right up there, sort of right on the edge of the asterism. So probably the easiest way would be to start at Eta, and then it's about, what's that? It's about 2 degrees or so, 2 or 3 degrees along that line between Eta and Beta. So relatively easy to find in that asterism. So our final object is another planetary nebula, which is NGC 6572. So this is quite different from the Box Nebula that we saw previously. So in this photo, you can see there's quite a bit of detail in the center. That I find is generally not visible in the eyepiece. What you see is this round halo here. So through the eyepiece, it looks like a fairly small, compact but bright bluish ball. So the last one was greenish. This tends to have a more bluish color to my eye with soft edges. And generally, I can't remember having seen the central star, but people have reported the central star occasionally visible. And if you look at its magnitude, it's 12.9, so that is doable. So particularly if you're looking, say, with an 8-inch telescope or above, when you're looking at this object with high magnification, have a look and see where you may be able to see that central star as well. So to find NGC 6572, I'll just zoom out a bit and you can see that it's over here in this part of the constellation. So that's 4 objects amongst probably at least 100 decent objects in Ophiuchus. So hopefully you get a chance to take a look at those, and be sure to take a look at some of the other globular clusters and so forth around as well when you're in that area. Thank you for joining me in today's show. I hope you find the information interesting and useful. And now that the nights are hopefully getting a little bit warmer and clearer, I hope you get some great opportunities to get out under our wonderful night sky. And so until the October show, clear skies and bye for now.